So I sort of went along with it, though theoretically I had difficulty with it, but sort of emotional, pragmatic grounds I went along with it. I no longer have those concerns. I have no affection for the nation state at all. Too many people have suffered at its hands. The consensual hallucination articulated by Bill Gibson has given us so many instances where the nation state simply makes no sense. I mean, we can have other kinds of hallucinations. Just to go back to the definition of Benedict Anderson, of people in England who read the same newspaper throughout the United Kingdom. The newspaper that I most regularly read is the New York Times. And I'm sure there are many people in Canada who do that, because online it's easier to read it than to read anything else. And I believe that the Toronto Globe and Mail most probably has overtaken some of the Vancouver newspapers by now, at least among certain circles. So, you know, this internet thing is changing a lot of these. There are two key areas where the nation state makes sense, in my view. One is war. The externalities of military attack under current technology. I mean, we can again, like my friend Anwari operating on people in northern Ontario, we can imagine genetically coded military attacks where, you know, you come in and kill all the Armenians, you know, you're right next to an Armenian and kill the Armenian and the person next to them is alive. Or you can kill all the people who use Linux, or you can sort of kill them in cyberspace and keep all the Microsoft people alive. You know, you can do that, you can conceptualize it, but we are not quite there yet. Right now, when we use crude weapons where, you know, I try to kill you, I kill everybody around you. And I talk about, in this paper, I talk about some of these particular experiences of the Indian Air Force violating Sri Lankan airspace back in 1987. And, you know, the RAW and all that. So war is one area where the nation state has got tremendous possibilities, and it really is needed. Then the second is the basic problem of democracy, which is, this is an argument that was very well articulated by Jerry Brown in one of his campaigns, which is all these trade agreements, blah, 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 are okay, but how they're so distant from human beings that you can't really participate in the decision making. And I think that's a very, very powerful argument, extraordinarily powerful argument. Because however much somebody like me tries to see, you know, what are my people thinking, what are these people who I represent think, very little opportunity for me to actually get that feedback when I'm in those rooms. So it's a very distant technocratic activity. So I think that's the fundamental flaw of a lot of the trade negotiations. But of course, I would then argue that if I apply that criterion to the United States government, with 280 million people, a Congress and Senate that's located in Washington, I mean, what role do the people in you know, Columbus, Ohio, or some other place have in those decisions? Do they really participate in that? So the democracy argument actually attacks the nation state itself. It doesn't say that the nation state wins. It just says that we'll have to get it down to some manageable level for people to actually make decisions. I think the Canadian situation of, you know, 30 million people more or less, and you guys sitting here pretty much shut out of everything when the decisions are made in Ottawa, Toronto, and Montreal is something you should think about when you rail against the WTO and its anti-democratic aspects. So the issue really is, in the end, while these problems exist, I think the nation state is going down the tubes. Something else is coming up, what I talk about as the petri dishes. This is what we are working about with the NAFTAs, the India-Sri Lanka agreements, the European Union. There's things cooking in these places that require our attention. For various reasons, not identical reasons, political leaders are voluntarily ceding elements of national sovereignty to larger entities and supranational treaties. In the case of Sri Lanka, we are yielding significant amounts of sovereignty in order to save sovereignty from chronic instability that would be caused if we have a Tamil state 24 miles across the water from the 240 million people in Tamil Nadu. So I'm not saying that, if we can do a separate state and get on with life, we would do it. But it's also a problem, because once you do that, you're living with enormous amounts of instability. So whatever will be created, I mean, what is happening, all this theoretical stuff is irrelevant. What is really happening is that the transportation and the communication networks are going to get so integrated that in fact you can't unscramble the egg once it's done. So that's the agony that I was living through in these rooms as I was negotiating. And I thought about Canada, and I thought about all these concerns that you guys had about Canada getting completely eaten up by the United States. But then I happened to read some of these opinion polls about gay marriages and the use of marijuana, particularly in Amsterdam, is it? And I said, oh my God, this place has deviated a lot more from American culture than when I was living here, when we lived here in the 80s. Culturally, there seems to be a greater divergence, despite all the claims that people said of cultural homogenization. So I took hope from that and think that this particular hybrid island culture of Sri Lanka will survive despite what we do in the conference rooms. Thank you.